Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today for this important conversation. My name's Melanie Borker, and I'm the Tri State Regional Assistant Director of Alums for Campus Fairness. ACF harnesses the unique power of alumni to counter anti Semitism and the demonization of Israel on our college and university campuses. We are dedicated to preventing discrimination and to holding educational institutions accountable for remaining pillars of truth and academic freedom. Anti Semitism in all its forms has been on the rise, and our panel today will focus on the challenges Jewish students face on campus and explore ways to foster tolerance, inclusivity, and fairness. There has been an alarming rise in anti Semitic and anti Israel incidents on our college campuses. This, in large part, is due to anti Zionist propaganda finding a home in academia. Those who work in this world or who stay up to date on what is going on know the severity of the Jew hate, often but not always disguised as Israel hate, that permeates our college campuses. Jewish students on campus have been victims of threats, of vandalism, and even physical assaults. They've even been barred from entering certain parts of campus. This is unacceptable. We cannot accept this as the new norm. Jewish and pro-Israel students, like all students, must be able to attend class, socialize, and walk around campus without fearing for their safety or feeling like they need to hide certain parts of their identity. Jewish and pro-Israel students need our support. ACF is the only organization engaging in educating alumni to counter anti-Semitism and the demonization of Israel on college campuses. We have a unified voice of over 67,000 members and continue to grow. We put leaders on notice of anti-Semitic incidents and organize rapid responses. We've deployed billboards, created petitions, and we've been featured in multiple news outlets to expose anti-Semitism and the double standards at schools following October 7th. We believe that by harnessing the unique power of alumni, we can help build a better future for all students, regardless of their backgrounds or beliefs. We thank you for joining us in this important work. I'm honored to introduce our esteemed panelists, Adela Cojab, Danielle Sobkin, and Shabbos Kestenbaum, who will share their personal experiences as strong Jewish leaders on campus and their insights into these crucial issues as recent alums. Adela is an alum of NYU and Cardozo Law. She's a legal advocate, media contributor, and social media activist, recognized for her steadfast commitment to protecting Jewish rights and to addressing anti-Semitism in academic institutions. I first heard Adela speak at a small event hosted by our friend Mordechai Weiss a few years ago. At the time, I was working in Big Law. Morty's gonna love the shout out. At the time, I was working in Big Law, but I spent my free time staying up to date and advocating for Jewish and pro-Israel causes. Hearing Adela speak and hearing her story helped inspire my decision to change career paths and fight for Jewish and Zionist rights full-time at ACF. Danielle is a UC Berkeley graduate, impressively completing her economics degree in just 3 years at the age of 20. A passionate advocate for diplomacy and community building, she has been involved in the Lauder and Geller Fellowships, focusing on diplomatic relations and the Abraham Accords. Danielle also co-founded the Student Syndicate, a national organization dedicated to combating anti-Semitism on college campuses. As a first-generation American and daughter of Soviet refugees, Danielle's experiences drive her commitment to positive change. Danielle is currently drafting her book, Refugee Daughter, while working at JP Morgan Chase as a global finance and business management analyst. Danielle was also the Jewish on-campus representative on an Israel trip attended by ACF's New England Regional Director, Ali Levine. Ali was so impressed by Danielle and all of her work. Shabbos Kestenbaum, who's joining us on Zoom, or will be shortly, probably needs no introduction. For those who don't know him, Shabbos is a student activist and the lead plaintiff against Harvard University, alleging pervasive and systemic anti-Semitism. He is a regular contributor on national media, has testified in front of the United States Congress multiple times, and lectures internationally on Jewish communal issues. The ACF team first heard Shabbos speak on a panel discussion at a conference earlier this summer. We all immediately agreed we needed to host an ACF event with Shabbos so others could hear his message and his story. ACF is thrilled to welcome Adela, Danielle, and Shabbos to speak with us this evening about anti-Semitism in our universities and how we as alumni, parents, and community members can take action to fight back. I'm going to start by a few moderated questions, and then I'll open it up for audience Q&A. We tried to incorporate the questions that people submitted earlier as well. Also, for questions, please limit it to questions and not make sure you're just not making a comment. So, even though I gave brief introductions, I'd love it if you both could just introduce yourself briefly and also share a bit about your personal experience with anti-Semitism when you were a student. Adela, we can start with you.
Great. Hi, everyone. And hi, everyone who's joining on Zoom. Is that the camera? Probably. Great. Hi, everyone. And hi, everyone. So my name's Adela Cojab, and my family's originally from Syria and Mexico. They moved to Deal, New Jersey, where I grew up. And I went to a Jewish day school where anti-Semitism wasn't really part of anything I experienced, and Zionism was always part of my identity and never questioned. When I went to NYU, I didn't really want to be so involved in the Jewish community. Said Judaism is great, but I'm not going to be the Jewish girl on campus. Lo and behold, I ended up getting super involved in the Jewish and pro-Israel community. I'm on student government. I had a radio show, and suddenly everything became about Israel-Palestine. And it started with typical BDS you might see on other college campuses, but it escalated pretty quickly to not only boycotts against NYU's Tel Aviv campus, but boycotts by professors against academics that are from Israel, boycotts by student groups against pro-Israel student groups, boycotts against individual students, posting pictures of them on social media, calling them fascist, boycotting me out of the Middle Eastern Studies department, couldn't partner with anyone for final projects, had to take my final exams in a separate room. Professors told me to stop coming to class, and all of it culminated in Yom Ha'atzmaut, where a group of students burned an Israeli flag, chanted "No Zionists" at NYU, and then took our other flags, torn them to shreds, and hung them from trees and lampposts. And throughout all of this, I'd been meeting with the school to tell them about what was happening at NYU. They kept telling me I was overreacting and that nothing was actually happening. And after NYPD stepped in at Yom Ha'atzmaut and made multiple arrests, I told the school that I wasn't imagining things. They had to take action. Instead of taking action, the school actually gave an award to Students for Justice in Palestine for their activism, the highest honor you can get at NYU. And that's when I made the decision to speak to lawyers. They told me that I didn't actually have a case because Title VI at the time didn't include Judaism under its protections. But they told me my case was strong enough to become the cornerstone that could start moving the needle in the right direction. So I made the decision to file a Title VI against NYU for anti-Semitism, knowing I would lose. And lo and behold, my case ends up making it to the White House. I end up speaking at IAC, which I'll be at tomorrow, with former President Trump. And 3 days later, he expanded the definition of Judaism from a faith-based religion to an ethno-religion, thereby falling under Title VI. So all the cases that you've been seeing today, Title VI for anti-Semitism, including Shabbos's. Well, actually, Shabbos did a federal suit, so a little bit different. They're possible because of the case that I had filed. So it made me understand that everything was worth it. After that, I worked for 2 years for the Maccabee Task Force under Sheldon Adelson. I worked a lot with ACF as part of ICC. We were in the same coalition. And then I went to law school. I thought I would be a prosecutor. And then after October 7th, I decided I have to advocate for my people. And now I work for the National Jewish Advocacy Center, or NJAC.
Thank you. Danielle, if you'd like to now share a bit about your story and the anti-Semitism you faced at Berkeley.
Sure. So first of all, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you everyone on Zoom, and a big shout out to Ali. Thank you to her. My story is similar. So my parents are from the former Soviet Union. They immigrated here after the fall of the Berlin Wall. My brother was actually born in Moscow when I was born here, so vastly different childhoods. He grew up with absolutely no connection to Judaism. Actually, he was not allowed, literally. And I grew up going to Jewish preschool and Chabad camps and really loving the Jewish community from the get-go. It was a completely different experience and something that we still disagree on heavily with my brother to this day. But I grew up loving the Jewish community. I was never too involved, but I loved it. I loved every single part of it. Like, you could not tear me away from a summer camp. That was my joy. And going to school, I started to hear jokes about Jews. And I remember coming home and telling my parents, they were making jokes about the gas chambers. And my parents couldn't believe me. They were like, no, they're not. They couldn't be doing that. It's, what year is it? We're in America. Can't be happening. And I was like, no, it's happening. Like, I'm telling you. So that was my first encounter with anti-Semitism back in middle school, and just the disbelief of what I was hearing. I always heard Russian jokes growing up, the vodka, the bears, everything, but I was kind of acclimated to it at that point. But the Jewish jokes, those were new. So I started to take a step back and really hide the fact that I was Jewish starting in middle school. It was something that I never wanted to bring up, never really wanted to bring it up or say or share it at all. And going to high school, it again persisted. But I promised myself, I made the promise that as soon as I got to college, I would do my part for the Jewish community. And of course, I chose the most Zionist school in America. I say that very jokingly, UC Berkeley. And I started, again, with the community aspect. I was the big Hillel girl. I was the big Chabad girl. And eventually, I was the president of these groups. I was the president of Bears for Israel, which is our pro-Israel group on campus. And as you can imagine, I was not a fan. I was not a big fan of my peers were not a big fan of me, excuse me. There were days where, similar to you, it was hard to go into class. I had professors that knew of my advocacy, of my work. They saw me on news. It's hard to kind of avoid that at a school like Berkeley. And it started to get really difficult after October 7th, especially. But when people ask me if it's something that I envisioned, I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised. I remember taking a Jewish studies class my second year on campus. There was a student that came with a swastika on his jacket. Swastika. And what did the Jewish professors say to me? What did the school say to me? Free speech. That's what they said. It was a form of free speech. So that's what being Jewish was like at Berkeley. And I'll go more into it in detail. Obviously, last year was extremely interesting. We had riots. We had bonus points to those attending anti-Israel rallies. We had peers that stopped talking to us completely. My consulting club, actually, my first year, had a statement of, we're not going to let any more Zionists into our consulting club. You can imagine I was no longer a part of that consulting club anymore. But it was a fun time. And I want to say the biggest thing to parents or students listening to this, when I get asked, should we send our students to the UC Berkeleys, the UPenns, the Harvards? You should. You should. You should send your students there, because if there are no Jews at these schools in 10, 20 years, imagine what it's going to be like. Imagine what it's like today for students. Imagine what it's going to be like in a decade, 2 decades. So I'll go into that more, but it taught me a lot. And the question that I often get asked is if I regret going to UC Berkeley. No. I don't. It was hard. It was difficult. It was painful. There were late nights, lots of crying, lots of challenges. And similar to Adela and Shabbos, we now have a lawsuit going, but I don't regret it for 1 minute, because it taught me what it means to be Jewish and proud in the hardest of times. And it showed me how powerful the Jewish community is, especially in the last year. So I can go into all of that more, but I'll pass it over to Shabbos.
Okay. Shabbos might join us in a bit. Thank you both for sharing. And actually, that was going to be one of my questions later is, parents, I think, are rightfully really concerned about where to send their kids, but also there's this idea of, should we still be giving our money to these college campuses, that these colleges that are not protecting Jewish students or pro-Israel students? And on the one hand, some people say, no, I don't want to give my money anymore. But then on the other side, it's, what happens when we don't have a seat at the table, or there's no one there to represent our interests? So you touched on it a little bit, but I just wanted to give you both the chance, if you want to expand on that, or what you have to say.
So absolutely, I agree with everything you said. And I'll add a couple of things. A couple of reasons why you should be sending your kids to these schools is not only because if we're not there, then we lose our seat at the table and it's taken by someone who is even worse, but because we shouldn't see giving money to the universities as doing them a favor. Because guess what? There's wait lists with thousands of kids for these schools. So if you don't take that seat, someone else will. Your money of tuition means nothing to the school. So don't see it as you doing the school a favor. You see it as you taking the opportunity to get the education that you deserve and you worked hard to have. So you have these kids that worked throughout all of high school, studied for the SATs, worked hard to get their GPA up, did extracurriculars, got into Harvard, got into Berkeley, got into the school of their dreams, to decide not to go. They deserve that Ivy League education. So don't deny yourself the education you deserve because someone else told you you don't belong. And I always say, every single time I publicly speak, if you let others decide where a Jew can and cannot feel comfortable, then you are letting anti-Semitism win. Another thing I'll add is that I don't think that pulling our students from the schools and going to Yeshiva University, which I am an alum of, I love Cardozo, is the right decision either, because I think that that leans into the Jewish anxiety of when it's dangerous, we hide, and when it's dangerous, we leave, instead of leaning into the Jewish strength. The Jewish strength of, I belong here, and I worked hard to have these rights, too hard to give them up. So that's what I would say to parents deciding to send their kids or kids who got into schools and deciding whether or not they should go. You'll always have a Jewish community who supports you, and you'll always have the support of your parents. And luckily, when you have strong students, like Shabbos and Danielle, then you can start moving the needle legally. And the last thing I'll say about giving money when it comes to larger donations, it's not about pulling your funds from schools, because unless you're Bill Ackman, it's not going to make a difference. But if you are Bill Ackman, or if you're giving a donation lower than Bill Ackman, don't think about putting your name outside of a business school. We have enough Jewish business schools and Jewish medical schools. What we should be doing is sponsoring professors. That's what Qatar's been doing. That's what Iran's been doing. That's what the Saudis have been doing. When you sponsor professors, it doesn't have to be like the professor of Holocaust studies, professor of Judaic studies. Those we should definitely be sponsoring. But even when you sponsor a professor of medicine or a professor of history, that's a professor that's not going to veer off course. And that's how you change the curriculum of a school, by sponsoring professors instead of donating buildings.
Thank you. So I know you both touched a little bit on your personal experiences, but I just wanted to broaden the scope a little bit. So how have you seen anti-Semitism manifest on your campus and college campuses more generally, especially in like the subtle ways? What do you think are the most troubling or surprising forms of anti-Semitism on our college campuses right now?
I think, like you said, it's the most subtle ways that they just try to intervene it or interweave it into the curriculum. So we had a computer science professor last year at Berkeley who talked about the genocide. 30 minutes. It's recorded. It's on YouTube. You guys can go watch it. He took 30 minutes of dedicated lecture time to talk about the genocide. What genocide? Second of all, we have students being allowed to get bonus points for attending rallies. We have so many ways that it's literally being encouraged to be anti-Israel, to be anti-Jewish on campus. And it's those simple ways of a TA bringing it up slightly. Oh, did you guys see the news? Da, da, da. It's the ways that it's talked about, so slightly, but so commonly by your peers that it's being normalized. This Jewish hatred, this anti-Semitism just being normalized, whether it's, in sorority talk, whether it's in consulting club talk, whether it's, like I just said, you're in a consulting club and you're interviewing candidates and on a resume, you see Hebrew, or you see some Jewish organization, and the conversation then pivots to, yeah, no more Jews in our club, or no more Zionists in our club. So it's those ways that you see it so slightly, but so normalized, that I think is the biggest issue. And so many students that I've talked to are just sitting down when it's happening. I could have so easily been the student in the consulting club that just sat down and kept quiet because I don't want to be outed. I don't want to be looked at as, the crazy Jew in the consulting club. I could have easily sat there and been quiet. But what I want to encourage every parent, every alumni, every student is to speak up. And I know that's so difficult and so hard, and it comes with, trust me, a lot of consequences, getting ostracized, getting kicked out, whatever it might be. But if we don't speak up, if we don't go to that TA, to that professor, after class, office hours, whatever it is, get campus administrators involved, get lawyers involved. If we don't take those steps, nobody is. And again, we're finding ourselves where we are now in this time after October 7th, when we should be so blatantly supporting the state of Israel, supporting Jewish students. We're finding ourselves in this totally dystopic world because 5 years ago, we kept quiet and we let it pass as a norm. We let anti-Jewish normalization become so prominent and so normal and so almost seemingly needed that this is where we are today.
Yeah, I think one of the main ways that I've been seeing subtle anti-Semitism after speaking to a ton of students is the way that people become ashamed to associate with Jewish identity. And this isn't just unique to secular universities. I went to Cardozo Law, which is part of Yeshiva University, again, which I love. After Yeshiva University and the Pride Alliance had, legal dispute, Cardozo in support put up a giant pride flag on Cardozo's window. And this was up for about a year. And that was great and wonderful, so cool. And then if you fast forward post October 7th, a group of Jewish students approached Cardozo and said, we want to put up an Israeli flag, or at least a big bring them home ribbon in solidarity with the hostages. And Cardozo said that they don't put up large signs in their lobby. It's against the school's policy. And they said, well, there's a pride flag that's been up for over a year. And when we came back, the pride flag was taken down. So Cardozo would rather take down a pride flag that they so proudly stood behind than put up an Israeli flag. And that's an affiliate of Yeshiva University. So when you see something like that, it starts telling you it's that ostracization. It's really othering the Jew and saying, well, I guess if we don't support it and we just remain quiet, that's enough. And they say that the opposite of hate isn't love, it's indifference. And that's what people are showing, it's willing indifference. And I just spoke at a panel for Jewish grad students, and they asked me, well, what do you do when someone who, isn't really your friend, but, you sit near each other in class, and they know you and you know them, and you see them at a rally or at an encampment? What do you do? And I said, ever notice how when you walk by them at the encampment and you try to make eye contact, they look down. They look down. They can't look you in the eye because they don't know what they're supporting. And they can't stand behind it once they get called out without even being called out. So what I said, the advice I gave is you don't have to have a big confrontation, but when you see them at the encampment, you hold that eye contact. And then the next day in class, you just say, hey, how was your weekend? Continue being in their life because that's how you hold them accountable subtly, without needing to have a whole confrontation, without having to have a whole DM conversation, but hold the eye contact.
Thank you both. I think those are really important points. So from your perspective, this is a bit of a loaded question. Is anti-Semitism on campuses often linked with political discourse, particularly around Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And then how do these dynamics play out, and how should the universities handle this intersection?
I don't even know where to start with Berkeley. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard of UC Berkeley. We champion the free speech movement. It's no surprise to say it's definitely a university that holds liberal values. And like we're seeing in the media, like we're seeing with this whole Israel-Palestine conflict, we're seeing the far left, we're seeing the left in general, really run with the idea that Israel is a genocide country, is oppressing, is all these fun buzzwords that we know and hear. So when you're looking at a campus like UC Berkeley, it's almost automatic that you hear Israel, you hear Jew, and you think, oh, they're the bad guy. And that's the exact stereotype that's enforcing these terrible norms, enforcing the fact that we're talking about a consulting club, and the first thing you see whenever you see Hebrew or Jewish on a resume is you think, oh, another Zionist in our club. Or when you're walking across campus, and God forbid you're at a rally and you're a counter protester and you have the Israel flag draped over you, and people just look at you like you're this crazy person supporting who knows what. So at Berkeley, you're looking at a school that's so deeply entrenched these values of Israel and Jewish as the other, as the bad, like you said. We're, of course, looking at this issue of political polarization, which is making it really complicated because I have friends that are all across the political spectrum, and now they have nowhere to call home in this political ideology that have strong liberal values, that have strong left values, but can now no longer identify with this party. And again, you're seeing this enforced in classrooms, you're seeing this enforced in any sort of extracurricular, whether that's a consulting club, a dance organization, a volunteer organization. You're having these political agendas being forced upon you everywhere you go on campus. It doesn't have to be class. It doesn't have to be work. It's everywhere. And that's the biggest issue. And when we're really aligning this definition of a Jew automatically with a negative and a bad and something really terrible to be that we have to be so ashamed of it, you're creating these deeply entrenched political norms that are making this so difficult, that are making it scary for students to say, hi, I'm a Jew and I'm proud. Hi, I'm a Zionist and I'm proud. And you're really scared of what that reality is going to look like for you when you come to class the next day, you come to the next consulting club meeting, whatever it is. And again, you're looking at Berkeley, which I think is a unique case given where it is politically. But after October 7th, you're looking at so many of these universities that have Gays for Gaza, that have all these different groups. And you really have to step back and you have to be like, do you guys even know what you're talking about? Because like you said, you have these students that are in encampments and advocating and yelling and being the strongest voice for a fight they don't even understand. And I think that is the biggest issue in the way that it's pushed politically as well.
Yeah, so I completely agree. And I'll tell you the thing with Gen Z. The thing with Gen Z is that they'll read the spark notes of a book and then they'll fight you on it. So if you're discussing a book that you've read with someone in Gen Z who saw a 60-second TikTok clip about it, and they'll be like, no, the rain symbolizes change. And you'll say, well, it could also symbolize renewal, which is a form of change. They'll say, no, it symbolizes change. Why? Because TikTok told me. So that's the thing with Gen Z. They don't take the time to actually do the work. Instead, they get the short version, they get 4 talking points, and they stick to them. Why? Because every single person is sticking to them. And I don't even have to tell you who's doing the best job of exposing this, I think, Zach Sage Fox. If you guys follow him on TikTok or on Instagram, he makes videos where he goes out and he'll say things like, do you know which river and which sea? Or he'll play a game show called, Would Hamas Kill You? And he'll just say things like, do you believe that women should have rights? And they'll say yes. And he'll say, congrats, Hamas would kill you, right? He'll play a game. Who said it? Hamas or ISIS? Surprise, every quote he gives is a Hamas quote, and everyone thinks that it's ISIS because they're the same. So that's the thing that I'm seeing with Gen Z. The thing I'm seeing with Gen Z is that they can't separate politics from culture. They can't separate culture from the online world. And then they'll fight you on all of these topics when they really don't know what they're talking about. And once you actually call them out, they'll straight up say something like, I don't know, I'm just here to support. To support what? I don't know, I'm just here for the movement. For the movement for what? And they can't answer the question. So I think it's less of a political issue and it's more of a cultural issue. I think the cultural issue is that we have a culture that doesn't know how to read. We don't have attention spans and you just listen to whatever it is that they tell you to. And then another thing, someone once asked me if I think it's scarier to be a Jew in Europe or a Jew in the United States. And I said a Jew in Europe. And the reason why is because it said that if you go to an anti-Jewish rally of sorts, in Europe, it's full of old men. If you go to one in the United States, it's full of 20-something-year-old kids, a 16-year-old. They don't even know what they're protesting. And guess what? Next month, it'll be something else. And the month after that, it'll be something else. It's not a deep ingrained anti-Semitism like they have in Europe. The anti-Semitism of the right, for example, deep ingrained. The anti-Semitism of the left, I see as something that's been hijacked and something that's being weaponized, and a bubble I think is going to pop. And it'll pop as soon as they switch it over to the West. And these kids realize that yelling death to America includes them because they are, whoop-de-doo, American.
I think you touched on, some important points in that there's kind of two big we see anti-Semitism in the streets, in the masses, like you said, a lot of Gen Zers who just see something on TikTok and, adopt that and then are so passionate that they are right. But then you also see it in academia. It's almost anti-Semitism is legitimized by these, professors with 8 PhDs or however many degrees, and they're maybe teaching it as anti-Zionism, but usually they're not so shy. They're teaching anti-Semitism. So basically we have to fight it, in the masses, but also in our future leaders are being brainwashed in university classrooms. So it's almost like there's TikTok university, but also the real university is, and they're both preaching the same kind of lies. Just summary, maybe using bigger vocabulary words. So thank you both. So now I want to shift towards solutions. So while it's clear that most universities are failing to adequately address anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic incidences, there are some exceptions. So what are some concrete steps from universities that they can take to protect Jewish students better and address anti-Semitism? For example, are there specific school policies that schools should implement or things like that?
Oh, can I take this one first because I'm really excited? Okay, NYU. So I went to NYU, and as you heard, it was a horrible experience half of the time. The other half was wonderful, but half of it was really terrible. And if you haven't seen, you should read this. NYU just came out with a new discrimination and harassment policy. It is the first school to come out with a policy this strong, where it explicitly dedicates, 4 or 5 paragraphs to the fact that Zionist has been used as a code word for Jew, and you cannot discriminate against students for being Zionist. It explicitly says that every single club has to be open cannot close its doors to Zionists. You cannot be anti-Zionist at NYU anymore openly without it being anti-Semitic. That is phenomenal. And the reason why, again, is because NYU was sued 5 years ago, and then NYU was sued again this year. NYU couldn't say that they weren't on notice because they were. And that's why NYU has come out so strong when other universities are still floundering. And the reason why it gives me hope and why I get so excited is first off, the personal stake I have, but also because this is going to be the precedent for all the other schools. Because schools look to each other when they're settling these kinds of cases. They like broad stroke solutions. So if this is what we're seeing NYU do, I have really good hope for the rest of the schools. Other than that, I always say that schools should be meeting regularly with Jewish students, and Jewish students should demand those meetings because other students do too. That's a good way to hold the schools accountable, but that's a really good step that I've been seeing schools take. I mean, it's not like NYU took it on its own. They were sued, but it's the greatest solution I could have thought of. Now we'll just see how they implement it. And if they don't, again, we have a policy we can hold NYU to. And if it's another lawsuit, it's another lawsuit. Every single one of them inches you closer.
I want to first start by the problem, at least that I experienced at Berkeley, is that the hatred that we saw towards Jewish students, whether it was a hate crime, openly anti-Zionist incidents, or just blatant physical attacks, violence, the school said that it came from it was political, right? Was it a hate crime? Was it just, a random incident that happened to a Jewish student? Everything that happened in regards to Jewish students, it was political. Even what happened after October 7th, it took UC Berkeley 2 weeks to send out an official school-wide email. How long did it take UC Berkeley to send out an email whenever we saw everything happening with Black Lives Matter? Less than 24 hours. Less than 24 hours. And after the worst attack on the Jewish people after the Holocaust, it took UC Berkeley, the renowned institution that fought for free speech, women's rights, and disability rights, 2 weeks. So that's the problem. Whenever schools see Israel, whenever schools see Jews, they think and they see, it's political. It's a debate. Well, it's not a debate. That's the solution. Jewish hatred, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is not political. And I'm really hopeful because NYU really is leading the way. UC Berkeley has a long way to go. And they see it still, even today, as a political problem. There was a video clip that went viral of me yelling at administrators, not yelling, speaking very passionately with administrators outside of a rally and asking them why could they not condemn Jewish hatred? Whenever it comes to any other group on campus, ethnic, religious, whatever it was, they have no issue denouncing that kind of hatred. But when it comes to Jewish students, when it comes to students supporting Israel, it's political. It's political. And my question to them was why? When it comes to Jewish students, why? So this is where you can really, again, demand those meetings. Like Adela said, if you're not in those meetings, somebody else is. And I remember when I first reached out to administrators directly after October 7th, the reply to me was, who do you think you are? You're nobody, they told me. They literally told me that I was a nobody on campus. I was not in student government. I was not the president of I was not the president of the student body. I was the president of a Jewish organization, of a pro-Israel organization on campus. And to them, their question was, who was I? And I told them, I'm somebody that cares about Israel. I'm concerned about my safety, and I'm a student paying full tuition for my university. I demand to speak to administrators. I would like to speak to whoever's sending out these emails, and I should be in the room. I might not be a student government official, but like anybody on campus, like any concerned student, parent, or alumni, I have a voice. And taking up that space, demanding those meetings, asking to be in the room is the biggest thing you have to do. Reaching out to lawyers, getting those involved who care, whether it's alumni, whether it's donors, whether it's the lawyers in charge of all these suits going around, you have to get your team together and you have to strategize. You can't just go in saying, I want this, that, and the other. Because trust me, we were there directly after October 7th. We had a list of demands. And looking back, not the smartest move. You really have to align with your values, talk to the leaders on your campus. And I'm not only talking about the students, I'm talking about the Jewish professors, I'm talking about the student orgs, I'm talking about the organizations like Hillel, Chabad, Jewish students, Jewish studies centers. You really have to align and get your team together and attack, have a plan of attack. Because trust me, the other side is doing it, and it's time that we get on board.
Thanks. So beyond specific school policies, what other measures do you think are most effective in combating anti-Semitism on campus? So for example, just some laws, programs, grassroots movements, what do you think is most effective?
That's a good question. I think what is most effective and what I would want every university to have is at the beginning of the year, you have to have a Know Your Rights workshop where every Jewish student is sitting. It has to be hosted either by the Hillel or by Chabad or by the SSI, by whoever you want. But you have to bring in someone either from the Brandeis Center, from the Lawfare Project, from NJAC, from Stand With Us Legal, from any of these phenomenal legal organizations to sit down and train your students. You have rights, you have a right to use them, and you should know how. So that's what I think would be most effective. I actually just spoke to someone last night that said, what do you think is missing? And I said, students are all past the, fear that we felt post October 7th. They're ready. They just need to know what to do. So I think that that would be the most effective thing that we can see, how to use the law. And by the way, it's not just Title VI. Title VI is discrimination law under the Civil Rights Act. I use Title VI. Title VI is the easier one to file, but end of the day, harassment, you have tort cases, you have defamation. There's so many things that you could do. You can even do basic contract law, right? Like if you don't have access to your campus, then that's a broken contract that the school has with you. And you don't even have to touch discrimination law to get to these legal issues. Another thing that I think that would be extremely effective, and this is a specific school policy, but not really, is Jewish students should be speaking to their schools and having them at the beginning of the year send an outline of their protester policy. That way, the students know if you break this, you're going to be in hot water. And the Jewish students know that if it's broken, they can bring it to the school, and the school has to hold themselves to their own policies. So it's again, schools do have these policies a lot of the time. Make sure they include anti-Semitism, and make sure that you're using them. Now, outside of programs that educate people on their rights, which I think is the most important thing that you can do, another thing that I've been seeing that's really helpful for fighting anti-Semitism is just being educated on the facts. We send a lot of Jewish students into colleges completely clueless. And I think that one of the reasons why they don't stand up to the anti-Zionist bullies is because they feel they don't know enough. And 9 times out of 10, they actually don't. And I think that that's a very big issue. Like when someone comes up and says the word Nakba, you should know what they're talking about. When they say Sheikh Jarrah, you should know what they're talking about. And you should be able to counter it with your own points. And it's not always about fighting. It's not about countering. It's about knowing your own history. We can't say that we're on the side of the righteous or that, we are justified in what we're doing if we don't actually know.
I definitely agree. I think also just to say, knowing the school policies is incredibly important, but I think also what we're seeing in such the downfall that has happened over the last year is schools do have these policies. You're not allowed to openly discriminate. You're not allowed to just riot a building and break glass like happened at UC Berkeley. You're not allowed to demonstratively every single day block campus entrances. What we're seeing happening is these schools that do have these rules are not following through on the consequences. And I think that's the biggest issue that we've seen, but also adding on, also, of course, education. And I think it also depends on from school to school. If you take UF, for example, versus UC Berkeley, obviously very different schools, very different environments, and very different Jewish bodies. And you have a lot of different resources to your advantage. You have so many fellowships around the world. Take advantage of those. Be a part of them. Actively seek out these opportunities, and you will be able to learn and connect so much and grow your network. And it's amazing to say that now, looking back over the last 3 years, somebody not only across the states that I can call at almost every single college campus, but across the world, Jewish students that are ready to give advice and provide their opinions on, who else I could reach out to, who else I could contact. And I think that's really the power of the Jewish community that is so incredibly important during this time. But also, again, understanding that every campus is different. If you talk to your friend at Harvard, if you talk to your friend at NYU, it's going to be different. And you might not have a Control-C, Control-V solution. And I think you really have to be aware of your campus and its needs and how you can move forward, as well as, of course, the resources and the education that you can leverage.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, which both of you touched upon, is even schools, that have these policies, they're not enforcing them. But if students were aware of these policies and saw that their school was not enforcing them, they could then go to their schools and say, you must enforce them. But they have to be educated in order to do that. So now I want to talk about how important are alliances between Jewish organizations or Jewish student groups and other minority and other advocacy groups in fighting anti-Semitism. How do we engage non-Jewish friends and peers, especially when what they might be learning in the classroom or from their other social networks might be very different from our point of view of things, the facts?
Well, of course, they're extremely important, but unfortunately, right now they're strained. I know at NYU, we're talking about 3-4 years ago, more, 5-6 years ago, when I was, in the midst of deciding whether to file my lawsuit. We had completely lost the Black Student Union. We had completely lost the Latino Student Union. All the major unions in school, it was a non-starter. They were boycotting us outright. But there's two anecdotes I'll share. Number one was I had a friend I made freshman year. We were lunch once a month kind of friends, not like we text every day kind of friends. And we didn't really keep up that much with each other, but again, once a month we'd grab lunch. She ended up becoming the president of the African Association for Development. I became the president of Realize Israel. She called me up in January, a full month before any of the boycotts, actually came to be at NYU. And she said, hey, just wanted to let you know, I was approached by the Black and Brown Coalition. They want me to sign a BDS pledge against your club, Realize Israel. And she told me straight up, she said, I support the oppressed against the oppressors. I don't know much about Israel-Palestine, and I know I probably side with Palestinians, but I don't think that it's the place of my club to boycott you because I know you. So I'm just letting you know we're not going to sign on, but it's not a political statement. And her club became the only member of the Black and Brown Coalition not to sign. And she's still till this day one of my really good friends. She lives in Austin. And we see each other all the time. She came to my brother's wedding in Mexico. We're good friends. And that happened from a personal relationship, not because I tried to intentionally build a coalition. That's a personal friendship that ended up, helping me in the long run with the specific thing without it being my intention. I think that where Jewish students get it wrong when they build coalitions is that they're disingenuous. If you actually care about a cause, be involved in that cause. If you care about fighting for women's rights, join the Women's Law Association. Great, do it. But if it's not actually your thing and you're really doing it because you're trying to build a coalition, they see right through it. You're not really there because you want to, and they can tell. But that doesn't mean that you can't build a strategic coalition. So when we had the BDS vote, I called up the head of the School of Engineering, Pakistani guy. I knew he wasn't going to be on my side, and I wasn't going to be like, hey, you're Pakistani, I'm Syrian, like Middle Eastern culture, la 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 la, we're so much fun. Don't vote for BDS. Like that wasn't going to work. So instead, I called him and I said, hey, you're president of the engineering school. He said, yes. I said, great. We're about to have a BDS vote. That includes NYU's Tel Aviv campus, which has a lot of internships and exchange programs for engineering students. I said, please join me in voting against this resolution for the sake of your own students. That's a coalition. That's not trying to build a relationship that turns into something that you use. That's straight up being honest about what your goals are and what my goals are. The way that we could do it now and the way that we did it at NYU when everything was so explosive was we had a leadership dinner. We invited the dean of the president of the school who decided he wasn't going to come, but he sent a representative. We invited Congressman Adler, who's the congressman that represents New York, like NYU area's district. And we invited the presidents of all the major clubs and their executive boards. We invited student government, and all we said, it was a Shabbat dinner. And we said, we, the Jewish community of NYU, during this difficult time on campus, would like to open our doors to have a leadership Shabbat hosted by, an administrator in the university, by our congressman, just to share in this moment. And that's it. 0% political. We didn't talk about Israel once at all. And we did have the presidents of major clubs. There were, of course, a lot of people who boycotted this event, sure. But for example, the women's organization that had boycotted us for an event we were supposed to have with them for sexual harassment awareness with Krav Maga, et cetera, their president did come to the leadership dinner. And you have the invitation not come from the Jewish community, you have it come from the Jewish community jointly with the office of the administration. So that's a way that you can build those relationships without them, shutting you up.
I think you hit it on the nail. And also just to say, I think the worst advice we could be giving Jewish students as Jewish friends, Jewish parents, Jewish alumni is to stick to Jewish spaces. That's the easiest thing that we can do is to stick to our Jewish friends, to stick to Hillel, Chabad, the Jewish clubs, whatever it might be. And I want to say that, yes, build your Jewish community and build it strong. Go to the Shabbats, join to me, the Jewish Consulting Club, whatever it might be, but also don't limit yourself. Join the non-Jewish clubs, join the Women's Leadership Club, whatever it might be. Join those non-Jewish clubs, talk to your peers in class and build those genuine connections. And then, invite them to Shabbat at Hillel, invite them to Shabbat at Chabad, whatever it might be, and let them really see you in the most human form. Humanize your Jewish connection and explain why it is you care about Israel, but make it be genuine. Don't just come with an agenda. Because like we saw, it's easy to need to start to build those alliances with the ethnic groups or the cultural groups, whatever it might be when you're in a time of need, but do it when you're not in a time of need. Why were we not building those connections 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, whatever it might be? Why did we just turn now, for example, at the Berkeley pro-Israel space. We just turned to the Thai community. We just turned to the Hindu community to build those alliances. But why did it take something like October 7th for us to realize that we need to be building those bridges? Why did it take something like October 7th for us to realize that, yeah, the Jewish community is great, but we have to stick out. We have to go beyond it. We really have to do that. And I think as students, just entering campus, yes, get involved in the Jewish spaces because you're going to need those, but also explore past it, turn to the peers in class and talk to them, just build genuine connections and say, hey, are you doing anything Friday night? Come check out Shabbat. And honestly, they're probably going to have no idea what you're talking about. So for them, it's just going to be a fun get together dinner. And hey, they're going to learn about the Jewish community. They're going to come and see the beauty of it without it being, oh, Israel, oh, Palestine, and make those connections and build those bridges on a daily basis. Really challenge yourself to go out there every single day on campus and talk to somebody, and don't just assume, oh, you know, they look like they're going to go to an encampment later, or whatever it is. Or even if they were, ask them why they were there. Ask those questions to probe and see if they understand what it is they're advocating for and what it is they're standing up for, because at the end of the day, they probably don't. And you have such a crucial role to play in shaping their narrative and understanding of all of it.
And I just want to say really fast, non-Jewish people get really excited when you invite them to Shabbat. Like when it's an open invite, they feel weird coming. But when you say, hey, what are you up to Friday? Come to Shabbat, they get excited. Think if you have an Indian friend that says, hey, what are you up to next Wednesday? Want to come to Diwali? I would be like, oh, Wednesday I've got Diwali. And if someone's like, hey, what are you up to Wednesday? I'd be like, I have to go to Diwali because I've never been to Diwali before. That's very fun, very cool. So they hear about Shabbat in the general space. So if you invite them personally, they'll want to come just because they want to see what it's about. So but always, like, again, like the Hindu community I always compare to because we're a lot of similar.
And the best part about Jewish events is that we always have food. So it's an easy bargain to make.
And alcohol.
So we touched a little bit on, you know, what schools can do, what students can do. So what role can alumni play in shaping a more inclusive and tolerant campus environment? So how can we as alumni use our unique position to demand change?
It's okay, I'll start. I love this question because up until last year, I had no idea I could reach out to alumni of Berkeley, like genuinely Jewish alumni, and I didn't realize that the power that they could have in my life. I always thought that, oh, you know, once I graduate, I'll be an alumni, maybe I'll join some club of Berkeley alumni, whatever it might be. But I didn't realize the power of actually reaching out and building those connections. And again, I'm now thinking, why did it take something like October 7th to realize the power of Jewish alumni, the power of any alumni of a school, whether that's, you know, the power that they can have in terms of donations, boards that they sit on, communities that they're involved in, or something else entirely that you have no idea. And so over the last year, we worked so closely with a few different key alumni members of UC Berkeley. And I can't tell you how critical and important they were in the work that we played. For weeks, I was sending emails to administrators, to our chancellor, with no reply. I was sending and sending and sending and sending. And at some point, I just kind of gave up until one day there was an email that came through in my inbox from somebody that I completely didn't know. And he was asking, hey, you've been emailing a lot. Did you ever get a reply? And I said, you know what? No, I haven't. And only later did I realize after a phone call that he had an incredible part to play in not only the community, but also the strings that he knew and the people that he knew in high places, including the chancellor herself. And he was able to get her to not only reply to my email, but have a private meeting with key student leaders from the Jewish community. And it's these reach outs and these connections that you make with people that you might not even know who they are, but you get connected to them and they can play such an important role. So reach out to your alumni, use LinkedIn, use the internet, use whatever it is, and get in contact with them because they can play such an important role in the work and the power of change that you can make on a campus. And again, it's a shame that it took October 7th and events as we've seen in the last year to realize the power of alumni. But it's something that we can no longer ignore and we really have to leverage in everything that we're doing, whether it's a meeting, whether it's getting, again, donations or board seats, whatever it might be. We have to get Jewish alumni voices involved on campus issues because it's so easy to be disconnected, to graduate and think, oh yeah, the days whenever I was on X campus or Y campus. But you should be caring about your alumni. You should be caring about your college community post-graduation. You should be caring about the legacy, the name, and the students that are there right now because their experiences matter and their time on the campus matters too, because you have no idea where it can lead. And again, having that voice and having that presence is so incredibly important.
So I'll plug ACF for a second. When I was going through all the unpleasantness at NYU, ACF actually reached out to me and they said, we have a large alumni network. How can we help? And I said, actually, I do need your help. Can you start a petition? Because I don't have the time, headspace, or network to do that. ACF set up a website, professional website. it had phenomenal language. It had a petition to sign demanding that NYU listen to its Jewish students, take back the award from Students for Justice in Palestine, a whole slew of demands. Again, I didn't have the headspace. I was in the middle of my last semester of my undergraduate year, filing a lawsuit against the school, trying not to be hated, studying for my final exams, deciding what I'm doing after graduation. I was running like a headless chicken, and ACF really hopped in there. And that petition, I think, ended up getting like, I don't even remember how many signatures. It went mad viral. And I think it did prompt a response from the administration, right? And at least at the very minimum, it made me feel like I was extremely supported. And now as an alum, I'm in touch with NYU students at least once a week. I also have my two younger sisters are both at NYU, one undergraduate, one graduate. And I'm very much up to date. But the group of students now that run the pro-Israel life, the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, they'll reach out to me whenever they do vigils or rallies. And I can't come all the time, but whenever I do, they really, honest to God, appreciate it. And, you know, when I was there, I didn't have anyone to look to. This hadn't been done before. And whenever I spoke to alumni that went to NYU before me, would all say, well, when I went to NYU, it was NYU. Everything was totally fine. I'm like, okay, well, that's good for you. That's not the experience I had. So it's not about having the same or different experience. It's about how they can leverage it. And again, like an alumni, like end of the day, like they do make money, which college students don't. They do have professional careers, which college students don't, and they can use their careers to help the alum. So if you guys are alum listening to this, because this is ACF, I would recommend if you reach out to your pro-Israel group on their campus and ask what you can do. So if you have a legal background, if you have a consulting background, if you even have, you know, a background in finance, even connecting students during recruitment season to internships, because they might, you know, be afraid to apply to certain places, or they don't know who's going to take them if they have certain things, even just looking over their resume, that could be great. So I have so many students asking me for like law school application tips, being Jewish while applying to law school. It is what it is.
And also just really quickly, one of the things that was so incredibly helpful for us during the past year, especially at Berkeley, was if you're still in the area and you live close to the campus that you went to, reach out, first of all, to those student leaders and invite them over for a Shabbat. Invite them over and talk to them. Again, build those genuine connections, because I promise you it means the world to us to go into a home where we're not only supported and heard, but understood on such a deeper level. Because sure, well, I can reach out and go to Columbia, NYU, whatever campus it is. It's not the same connection that I have to Berkeley peers. And again, I'm now no longer in California, of course, but actually inviting them into your home means the world to us.
Thank you. So what advice would you have to a Jewish student on campus who's struggling with anti-Semitism, you know, knows it's a issue, but maybe they're not ready to file the lawsuit. They're not ready to like be that person to take on the fight. What advice would you have for them?
The advice I would have to a Jewish student who isn't ready to take on the fight would be that the fight for you is to maintain a strong Jewish identity, which means that if someone asks you, hey, what are you up to Friday night? You say that you're having Shabbat dinner. It's not checking your Jewish identity at the door, because that's the absolute bare minimum that you can do to feel, number one, self-actualized, and number two, to continue to normalize Judaism. Not everyone is meant to be an activist. And if you put yourself in a position where you're doing things that make you feel uncomfortable, some people have it in them, some people don't. But if you look at whatever skill you do have, and this is, I say it all the time, everyone has a passion and everyone has a skill, and you're already doing it. And you could be doing that for activism, right? So if someone's a photographer, they could do photography for activism. And it doesn't have to be political. You can even just photograph your family as they're getting ready for Shabbat and use that as part of your final project. There's these subtle ways to bring your Jewish identity in without it making it political. That's actually really beautiful. So that's the advice I would give to the Jewish students, and always to make sure that you know who your friends are. Look to your right, look to your left, know that those are the people who support you, and don't be afraid to lean on them.
I think that's really great advice. And I think it's really applicable also, not just for students, but for everyone, you know, as alumni, as people. Not all of us want to go out and be like the face of the movement against anti-Semitism, but just being proud in who we are as Jews and proudly saying, you know, we are going to Shabbat dinner. Or if someone asks, you know, what is that tag you're wearing? And being able to say, you know, this is to bring home the hostages, and just other ways. So I think what you said applies to not just students, but just to people. So thank you for sharing that. I don't know if you want to now.
I think you pretty much covered it. Just to quickly say again, like, regardless of where you are, never diminish your Jewish identity. And you don't have to be the leader of the movement. You don't have to be the face of Jews of Berkeley or Jews of NYU or Jews of Harvard, whatever you might be. But I can also tell you, if you asked me 4 years ago, my senior year of college, if I don't even know what question, if I were to be this involved or if I were to be this active, I would honestly laugh at you. I'd say no. I was always a strong member of the Jewish community, but I was never imagining myself being on national news, being in Time magazine, traveling across the world and advocating for Jews. Seriously. But we find ourselves in places where, you just can't stay quiet anymore, whether that's in a consulting club, in a sorority, just on campus, at a rally, whatever it might be. Find the people on campus that hear you and see you. Find your Jewish allies. And again, whether it's contributing as a photographer, even just being the Jewish voice without having to be the Jewish voice of the university means so much. And again, bringing in your Jewish values into everything and having people know that, you are Jewish and you're Jewish and proud, which is the most important thing. Don't shy away from your Jewish values. Don't stop wearing your Magen David. Don't stop wearing your bring them home tags. Don't stop doing those things, because once you start checking your Jewish identity at the door, that's how we've ended up here. And if we only continue moving in that direction, who knows where we're going to be in a decade, 2, 3.
Thank you. Are we okay for time, or should we move into? Okay. So if it's okay, we'll move into audience Q&A. Trey will bring a mic over to you just so that people on Zoom can hear.
Please share with us what changes have there been at Berkeley since the new chancellor came into office?
Sure. So I'm actually no longer on campus, but of course, still closely in contact with student leaders. And I have to tell you, he is amazing. First of all, he's a good friend of several alumni members that we've worked with closely over the last year. And even his stance, his communication, the position he has is incredible. Again, I don't know of any new policies that have actually been enacted, but I can say it's not the Berkeley that I experienced in the spring. And thank God, because that was a Berkeley that was pretty much intolerable. I was very much looking forward to being off campus for Hashem. But I do think he's bringing a totally new environment and values. And I think finally we're seeing consequences to action. Students can no longer, I can give some context, for almost 4 months, Sather Gate, which is the main entrance to campus, was blocked. We physically could not walk through. They were blocking it with banners and speakers and everything. We physically could not pass through, and that's no longer happening to my knowledge on campus. More than that, UC Berkeley falls under the UC system. So all the different UC schools, they have certain policies that they have to follow. And finally, we also had notice that there will be consequences. You can no longer be blocking certain areas. You can't be rallying without notice. There are certain values that, again, are being followed through, to my knowledge. And I think that's making a huge difference in campus culture and campus climate in a whole.
Otherwise, I can keep going. But
There was, yeah.
Hi there. What advice would you give to a Jewish professor at a CUNY school who is at a campus that has not no Jews, but pretty much no Jews, and certainly not easily recognizable Jews? Yeah, I guess that's my question. What would you, or just generally to a Jewish professor at any campus, but specifically CUNY, I guess, because there's an equivalent kind of between CUNY, the City University of New York, and the UC system, right? The UC system is for California entirely. The CUNY is only for New York, but they're both enormous systems, and they're government schools also, right? So there's that. What advice would you give?
Okay, so there's a few things I would say. So first of all, there's Jewish faculty, right? Jewish professors, and you could definitely host a seminar, a panel, whatever it might be, to bring Jewish professors to light, just to educate, to give your experiences, your story. I know we briefly spoke before the seminar, the experiences of being from the Soviet Union, whatever it might be. There's so many experiences that you can bring to conversation that students are fascinated to learn about. And I think would come to seminars like this, bringing Jewish conversation to life, whatever, depending on, of course, the subject you teach. You don't want to be out of context, but I think it's actually just human, bringing to light you as a Jew and a professor. Just being Jewish and proud, I think, is the most important part in getting together with faculty, getting together with students, getting together with non-Jewish students too, and just chatting, hosting open what's it, what is it called? Office hours. Oh my gosh, not even a year out of college, already forgetting it. But being able to talk with your students really frankly one-on-one and being open to conversation, I think is really important. But I would find your allies, host those open hours of chatting, seminars, panels, whatever it might be.
So when I went to NYU, and we had the multiple boycotts that came week after week, and really it was NYU Tel Aviv student government boycott, 70 faculty members boycotting all Israeli academics, and then 53 clubs, which is 1/6 of all the clubs at NYU, boycotting my student club. And it was really all back to back. So I met with, we have a Center for Jewish Studies and we have a Center for Israel Studies. And I met with the heads of both. And I said, hey, can you help us out with this? And they said, no. They said they don't get involved with student affairs. And I said, but my professors are giving extra credit to people who go to protest certain events. They're talking about praising Osama bin Laden in their classes. They're leading a boycott. And the Jewish professors, every single one, said, we're so sorry you're going through this, and we support you, but we just don't get involved. Meanwhile, SJP's campus advisor was my Middle Eastern Studies professor. So I think that the best thing that you could do being a Jewish professor at a CUNY, especially one that has few Jewish students, is making it clear that you're on their side and that whatever they need, you're a voice for them. And that doesn't mean that you have to be like openly rah rah. That means that, for example, if something does happen on campus, number one, they could come to you. And number two, you can go to the administration because sometimes they'll listen to a faculty member more than they'll listen to a group of students. So I think it's making it clear to them, whatever you need, even like sending out an email, like if the school does have a Hillel, sending out that the Hillel says at the bottom of their email, if you're looking for a campus resource, we have a great Jewish professor who, is ready to chat with you, whatever you're going through. I know a lot of students, for example, when they had issues in their classes with a professor, an anti-Semitic professor, they would come to me to talk about it because I was on student government, and they would have me to go to the administration to file a complaint anonymously for them because they were afraid of being connected. Maybe you being in the faculty space have more sway than, a student would. So even just being like an ear where they could say, I'm having an issue in this class, what's your advice? And you as a professor giving advice. Now, again, we as Jewish people, when I spoke to these professors, I said, well, why don't we get involved in student, campus affairs and student affairs? They said that as Jewish people, we have a job to do. We do our job and we leave. So if you teach economics, you teach economics and you leave. If you teach medicine, you teach medicine and you leave. If you teach dance, you teach dance and you leave. You don't teach the dance of Palestinian resistance in class number 3, right? Maybe it's about time that we start doing what they do. So, for example, if you're an English literature professor, maybe bring in some of the great Jewish thinkers and explain the context behind why they wrote what they wrote and say, look, this book was actually born of a lot of pain. It was born in a time of fleeing persecution, and you bring Jewish history in that way.
Also, quickly to add, so many professors who are tenured don't speak up, and that's the most confusing thing to me, because when you have nothing on the line, so to speak, why aren't you being the loudest voice for students? And Adele, I think you beautifully said, so many times administrators don't take students seriously, because at the end of the day, those students are going to leave after 4 years. There's going to be new students and they might not care as much, whatever it is, but the professors will be there. They will be there for decades, for however many years it might be. And they actually do have the power to change the environment. So what we saw at Berkeley is we saw with Ron Hasner, who literally camped out in his office, taught classes from Zoom, slept in his office for, I think, 3-4 weeks, something like that. And he invited Jewish students to come in and visit him. And there was a lot of food, obviously. And students, Jewish and non-Jewish, would come in and visit with him. And he had office hours every single day from literally 24 hours in the day. You could come anytime and stop by. And acts like that, being Jewish, being Israeli, whatever it was, he'd take that act so boldly as a professor. And again, he could do that because he is a professor. For students, there are other limitations. The consequences, obviously, for the other side are not being followed through. But I think as Jewish students, we really stick to the rules of our campuses. But I think professors have such a sway that they can do acts like that. They can, whatever it is, open their doors to Jewish students, whether it's students that they interact with or not, and just be a voice and be a person that they can lean on. I think you covered that really.
Yeah, like you don't have to be a shy Davidai that's, outside of the encampment yelling and pointing at people's phones. Like you don't have to be that person. It's great if you are. We love shy, but you don't have to. But even being that liaison between the students and the faculty or the students and the administration, I know the students would really appreciate that, especially if they're few and far between.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It's heartwarming. One of the few good things that's come out of all of this is a new generation of strong Jewish leaders, which is great to see. My question is, given the anti-Semitism that we're seeing in the professoriate and in the administrations of our most prestigious, quote unquote, universities, what gives you confidence that they're actually going to enforce the rules that they have absolutely failed to enforce so far?
Good question. So what gives me confidence that they'll enforce it? Nothing. There is no confidence that they will enforce it. But again, like I said, every lawsuit is an inch forward. And there's also the court of public opinion. So the more we keep exposing them, I know that legacy media hasn't been our friend, but every time that there is an article, like again, my lawsuit, I knew I was going to lose. The whole point was to have a headline that says, Jewish student sues NYU for anti-Semitism. The first time that headline was ever on a paper like the Post or the New York Times covered it too, right? So it's also getting like that. That's why NYU settled with me relatively quickly, because they didn't want to keep having those headlines. So I don't actually know how much they will enforce it, but if they don't enforce it, it means another suit, and another suit means more resources and more headlines, right? You're not allowed to file a frivolous suit, but if these suits aren't frivolous, it's going to take, resources, and we're going to take to social media and to the legacy media to try to make as much noise as possible. I also think that from my personal conversations with members in admissions at NYU, they said that, and a couple of administrators, Jewish ones that are actually on our side, they said that they've been privileging activism over academics, and that they can't be surprised when those very students start occupying their buildings, when that's literally the reason why they admitted them. So I think that we're going to start seeing a change in the type of student that's being admitted, the types of things that are being weighed in admissions. And I think that hopefully will lead to not having to enforce the policies. Again, going back, professors are the issue. Professors are continuously indoctrinating students, and you could bring the most adorable, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed human rights type of student, and they can be brainwashed in a second by a professor. But at the same time, I think that the administrations are tired. They're tired of having to replace Windows, of having to deal with this PR mess and nightmare. And that's why right now we're already 2-3 weeks into the semester. What have you heard? No encampments. There's been a couple of walkouts. Great, don't come to class. Your parents are paying for this. Don't come at all. Don't come back. But it's been relatively quiet because schools are laying down the law. They're exhausted too.
Also, being in those meetings one-on-one with chancellors, administrators, what it is, they know that the other side is in the wrong. They know what's going on is unacceptable. What they're not doing is actually speaking up about it publicly. And for a long time, I didn't have the confidence that anything would change, because after dozens of unanswered emails, after dozens of meetings that felt like nothing was actually going to change, of not being heard, I really thought that nothing would ever change. But I think slowly and surely we saw consequences happening and being reaped. We saw what happened in the courts. We saw chancellors stepping down, presidents stepping down. And I think that was the first and such needed step in this entire battle, is we saw that you are not invincible at the end of the day. You might have a great academic history, whatever it is, tenure, but you are not invincible. And if you think that Jewish hate and anti-Semitism and vile physical attacks against Jewish students is dependent on the context, you will have consequences, and it's not okay. And I think slowly but surely, we're denormalizing what's been normalized for so long.
First of all, I want to thank all of you, because it's really so heartwarming to hear your experiences. And Adela, I didn't recognize the fact that you were Realize Israel. And as you mentioned that NYU petition, I pulled up my email and searched NYU petition, and that was in May of 2018. It was one of the very first acts of ACF in the marketplace of anti-Semitism on campus. Our executive director, Avi Gordon, managed that petition, and I think I posted it to Facebook. And anyway, very exciting that you mentioned it. So I'm shaking to look at the two of you, because when we founded ACF in 2015, you were in middle school. And I assume, Adela, you were probably right about that spot.
I was a senior in high school.
Okay.
I'm 27. I'm an adult.
Okay. So it's a very different world. You know, the first, NYU was one of the first campuses to have anti-Semitic behavior, the BDS petitions and the boycotts. And the fact that you've come up in that environment and are sitting here and have experienced, you've really grown up in an environment that's very different than my generation or a couple of generations behind me. And I'm wondering, given that experience and that molding, having to go through college, when I went through to college, I didn't feel any hatred or dislike because I'm Jewish. And I wonder what it means for an alumni. So you have a very different experience than I had, and you're being forced to stand up and defend your identity, and you're doing it with great courage, and it's impressive and it's heartwarming to see the courage that is from what you've been through. So thinking about ACF and our desire to build a community of alumni to help students and to fight anti-Semitism, how would you describe the differences of being alumni now, being 27, in your 20s alumni, and what your fellow alumni are experiencing versus other generations that did not have to grow up, with this fear, with this, black cloud over your college education, your college years. So that would be my first question. Just if you could provide maybe some guidance for us on how we might identify and work with your generation in building alumni, in building alumni support and in building a larger group of younger alumni, because traditionally our alumni base in 67,000, as Melanie said, but I'm just curious, like what your perspective might be on the generational difference.
So I think the generational difference is school pride, right? Like my sister says, people come back to Princeton, for example, generations and generations. Like when you go during, I forgot what they call it, but it's essentially their homecoming week. You literally just see a whole bunch of people in their 40s and 50s walking around, people in their 30s. I have a lot of friends that went to University of Maryland and they go back every year for homecoming because they love it. And I think that the generations of students that are growing up with anti-Semitic campuses lose that school pride. I know, for example, for me, I love NYU. I've always loved NYU. I went to NYU pre-college. When I was in 10th grade, I was an NYU pre-college ambassador. I got a pamphlet when I was in 4th grade that said NYU, the school for leaders. And I said, I will go to NYU. I applied to NYU ED1. I had no backups. When they asked me what my backup was in case I don't get in, I said I would go to Israel, volunteer for a year, and apply again. I literally wanted nothing more than to go to NYU. And I went to NYU, and guess what? I was on student government, and I did have my NYU radio show on WNYU radio called the NY View. I was vice president of my sorority. I loved NYU so much. And then NYU turned into a place that wasn't right for me, and I stuck through it. And I love NYU so much. Whenever I spoke openly about what happened at NYU, I would say, I love NYU so much, and it hurts me that they couldn't love my community back. I applied to NYU for law school. They didn't want me back, and that's okay. But they did allow both my sisters to go. And I'm still a very proud NYU alum. I still wear my NYU sweatshirts. My friends don't. And my friends are learning from the ones that sued. So I think that that's a generational gap that we have to understand, that a lot of these students, like they might graduate from Columbia saying, sorry for the F-bomb, fuck Columbia. Oh, Columbia, fuck Columbia. I thought I'd be an NYU Torch Club member. You know how there's a Harvard club? NYU has a Torch Club, right? We're so cool. I thought I'd be going there at least once every 2 weeks for alumni events. I haven't stepped foot there, right? So I think that when it comes to the outreach, if you want to be reaching out to Jewish students, the school pride angle isn't going to work. I think what could work is when you speak to what I would do is I would reach out to the pro-Israel groups, and at the end or middle of their senior year, just host an event, co-hosted ACF with SSI or ACF with Realize Israel, and say it's just going to be like a campus networking event. It's going to, you bring some alum who are part of the ACF network. You have students there. It's close to their graduation. You have free food, wine, drinks, whatever it is that you want to do. And that way you can continue to build it, because that's the way that you can recruit into ACF. So they understand there is an alumni network. There is this little bucket of alumni of their same school that are ready to support them when they move out of the college process. So that's what I would do if I was ACF.
I think also post-college, the easiest thing to do is say, thank God, I'm in a new place in life, and just forget about college entirely. And trust me, so many of my peers have done that. They said, oh, I went to Berkeley and now I'm working in finance. And it's easy to do that. That's the natural route to take. But I encourage everyone, however many years you are post-college, if you don't care about the Jewish students on your alumni campus right now, what are you doing? What are you doing? Because who knows, maybe your kids will go there. Maybe you'll go back there for a master's, law school, whatever it is. Do you want to be on an awful on an awful campus that hates Jews? I don't. So it's getting involved and caring. And again, hosting those sessions with alumni, because so many alumni post-grad have no idea how to stay involved. They have no idea. Do I stay involved? How do I stay involved? What do I do? How do I help? Where can I help? There's so many questions, and it's tapping into the networks that you don't even know exist. Because the students on campus probably do need you, whether it's for something like a coffee chat, a Shabbos meal, to look over your resume. There's so many ways that you can help students on campus. And what we have to do as Jewish alumni is to start caring, to start offering our time, our ears, our homes, whatever it might be, and welcoming those students and being a shoulder that they can lean on. Because looking back on my 3 years on campus, if I tapped into that alumni network year one, I have no idea where I'd be right now. But I can say after tapping into it on our 3rd year, we were miles from where we started, not only with the fights that we had on campus, but also with the power of realizing we have people that care, people that were in our shoes, maybe not with the exact conditions like we had, but people that understand the campus, that have the memories, that have the school pride. And you don't have to be the person wearing the Cal grad sweatshirt every single day, but you do have to be the person that thinks back to your alumni and your school and your college experience and says, when's the last time that I reached out to students on campus? When's the last time that I offered my services to the Pro-Israel Club or the Hillel or the Chabad, whatever it might be, and actually realizing that you have a power to make in these students' journeys and not just stopping at, hey, I graduated, I got a degree, see you never.
Any other questions before we start wrapping up? Okay, so thank you both. Before we end our panel, I just wanted to ask both of you, for your final thoughts, to leave us with, what do you think is the most important message that you want people to take away from our conversation today, most specifically about alumni combating anti-Semitism? I know we just spoke a little bit about it, but kind of just a final takeaway.
I think my final takeaway is that campus isn't real life. But once you leave the campus, it's an experience that you have with you that, like Danielle said, you have to use it. So once you're out of the campus space, don't say, oh, well, thank God I don't have any encampments. Guess what? How many people have told me that their workplaces have become places where they're putting out statements against Israel or a fundraiser for Gaza that is clearly, tied to the Muslim Brotherhood, et cetera. So I think that my final message is to remember that campus might not be real life, but real life isn't that much better. And if you take the skills that you learned on campus and apply it to real life, not only to help the students who are still there, but to help each other, right? With everything that we said about students, about knowing your network, knowing your rights, being a network for each other, to lean on each other, being able to liaison with your bosses, the higher levels, all those things that we said about students applies to your life as a young professional. And just because you left campus doesn't mean that you leave that behind. There's always been a gap in, the Jewish affiliation. When you're on campus, you're very involved. You have your Chabad, your Hillel, etc. And then when you're old, you have your synagogue. But what happens in that in between? And I think that using alumni as a identity that binds you together, I think that that also gives you purpose. It gives you commonality and it gives you purpose. And I think as a young professional, it gives you the tools that you need to continue everything you learned in college, apply it to real life without thinking, oh, I'm in the clear, I'm in real life.
I think, like you said, it's really easy to think about college as being this mystical 4-year experience, and then you're in the real world. But like you said, the real world isn't much better. And whatever job you're working, whether it's in law, finance, whatever it might be, you can still bring your Jewish identity to the table. There are Jewish groups. There are ally groups. There are speaking groups. There are different ways that you can still be involved and still have that aspect of being Jewish and proud wherever it is that you go, and doing that with confidence and with chutzpah is so incredibly important. And I think that's the biggest thing that we have to be doing as Jewish people, is coming to our day jobs and being so incredibly proud of our Jewish identity. When people ask you, what are you doing Friday? I'm hosting Shabbos, I'm going to shul, whatever it is. Don't shy away from the answer, because if you asked me 5 years ago what I was doing on a Friday night, I'd tell you, oh, I'm sorry, I'm busy. And if you ask me today, I'll say, I'm sorry, I'm turning my phone off for 25 hours and I'm keeping Shabbat. And I say that's so incredibly proud. And what we cannot be doing anymore is shying away from our Jewish identity. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is getting involved with your alumni network. Because trust me, there are people like you that are sitting and thinking, what is it that I can be doing with my alumni network? Or even just other alums in the New York area, or whatever city you're in. There's people that also can't sit still, can't see what's happening on campus anymore and just let it pass. They want to do something. So get involved, do something, figure out what it is that people need on your campus, that student needs on your campus. Ask them, have those conversations. And as a student, I can tell you the worst thing that you can do actually is not talk to students, is think that, oh, hey, I'm seeing this and I think this should happen. Well, it's great that you think that, but ask the students. That's the biggest thing that matters, is you might think that something needs to happen, but what a student actually needs on X campus or Y campus might be totally different. So have those conversations, invite those students into the room and actually invite them into the conversation. That's the most important thing that you guys should be doing.
And I actually want to add one more thing. So if campus isn't real life and it's so absolutely horrible, let's make sure that when students graduate from campus, they come to a real life that is not only palatable, but accepting, and it's a safe place for them. So our job as young professionals and as alumni is to make sure that the workspace remains safe. So when those students that are having such a horrible time on college campuses graduate, we've already paved our way here.
Thank you both. And just a plug for ACF for those alumni sitting at home who don't want to stand idly by and want to be engaged and meet with other alumni who similarly want to take action. An easy way to do that is by becoming a member of ACF.